All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting on this beautiful Tuesday, January 21st. So we're going to get started today. I have a proclamation to read, and then I'm going to ask Mr. James Hurt, where's James? In the back there, and some of his team to come up and join me as I give them this proclamation. So I'll come up to the podium for this, and then we'll get started on the rest of our agenda. Come on up. The dream team. Here we go. All right. So today is a special day in our community as we celebrate 75-year anniversary. So this proclamation is related to fluoridation in our water. So whereas over 75 years, for over 75 years, communities in the United States have benefited from community water fluoridation. And whereas it was on January 25th, 1945, that Grand Rapids became the very first city in the world to fluoridate its drinking water. And whereas the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention calls water fluoridation one of the 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. Whereas water fluoridation is the process of adding a very small amount of fluoride to the public water supplies, which makes teeth stronger and prevents cavities. Whereas water fluoridation has become a major factor in lowering tooth decay throughout the United States. Whereas water fluoridation has been identified as the most feasible and cost-effective method of delivering fluoride to all members of a community, regardless of age, education, or income. Now, therefore, I, Rosalind Bliss, Mayor of our awesome city, do hereby join elected officials, water utilities, community leaders, and health professionals from across our country to commemorate this 75th anniversary of community water fluoridation. So I'll give this to James and let him say a few words.
Sure.
There you go. I'll join you back here.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commission, Mr. City Manager. 75 years of fluoridating our water. That is an awesome feat. And not only is that good for kids and tooth decay, but I think it speaks to us as an organization as being a leader. 75 years ago, we took the chance of putting fluoride in our water, and we continue to do things today to be a leader in many aspects of our utilities. I'm very pleased to have a team here today that represents all aspects of the water department, from pumping and treating, distribution, engineering, our billing folks. We wanted to just represent this as a great day to recognize Grand Rapids as a leader and 75 years of fluoridating our water. So congratulations, team. Thank you for all your work, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, thank you. All right, next we are going to have a presentation. So commissioners, this is not an action item. It's an information item, so we'll do that, and then we'll get to our action items that follow, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items. And then commissioners, just a reminder that we have right after Committee of the Whole, we have a executive session, so I'll call for that motion at the end. So today we're going to get a presentation of the Equitable Economic Development and Mobility Strategic Plan. So we have Mr. Klooster and Mr. Nairmore here that's going to do this presentation. I know they have a few other folks with them, but commissioners, just to give you a little background, I know those of us who serve on the Economic Development Project team, we've already been briefed on this, and we've seen a draft of the report. But a couple of you anyway, were around the table. I believe Commissioner Jones and Commissioner Apart were with me well over a year ago as we sat around the Economic Development Project team and talked about the need and the desire to work on an equitable economic development plan. And at that time, we gave direction to then Ms. Kara Wood, and then the Economic Development Department and the Mobile GR Department led the way after bringing together a number of folks from our community to help them on that journey. So today is the culmination of that work, and so we'll get a presentation today. This will act as the strategic plan for both departments. And then just to let you know, I know other departments have done strategic plans from our fire department, and other departments are working on them. So my hope is that this will have other departments come forward and share their strategic plans in the future. So welcome, Mr. Kluster, Mr. Naramore. I'll let you take it from here. Welcome. Oh, sorry, City Manager.
John was giving me the look. He has
Okay,
a look
sorry.
working today, boy.
Sorry, I'll
He's in
turn
charge.
to the City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, for laying that out. I want to thank the Economic Development Department as well as Mobility Department for coming together. As you said earlier, our strategic plan values both economic prosperity, mobility, and equity. And what we'll see today is the intersection of all of them coming forward. I've asked the department to be real intentional about making sure our community is a prosperous community and that we're focused on growth. And what you hear in this presentation is things that I marvel at when I go back and just hear from how far we've come, but also making sure that we stretch for our growth potential in the future and do it in a very equitable, intentional, and deliberate way, both with small businesses as well as the growing industries that we have in our community, as well as hopefully looking at even opportunities to become even more internationally recognized for some economic partnerships and development. And so I want to thank the department for doing that. And we'll hear both from Mr. Kluster and Mr. Naramore, as well as our community partners who are here with us today. I also want to thank HRNA for their consulting and partnership as well.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners, City Manager. We're pleased to have completed this process and to be presenting the final draft of the Equitable Economic Development and Mobility Strategic Plan to you. This is a process, as the Mayor said, that started in October of 2018. It has been led since that time by staff and the four co-chairs, three of whom are behind me, as well as many community partners. The executive summary of the plan is included in your packet, and the full 141-page plan will be posted on our website following the presentation today. So before making the presentation, I wanted to say a couple thank yous. Deeply indebted and grateful for the three people sitting here, as well as Aaron Yonker, Becca Velasquez-Publes, and Sini Jordan. Carlos Sanchez from Ferris State is not able to be here today, but that shouldn't be any indication of the level of commitment that he has given. These four individuals have really challenged us and have made this plan better than we could have hoped. So I'm eternally grateful to them. Also to staff, obviously, from our departments, the steering committee, the focus group participants, and then our consultants, HRNA and Nelson Nygaard.
So just wanted to say that at the forefront of this, so we're really excited to be here today at the culmination of all of this work. But very early on when we started the planning stages for this, the city embarked on the journey of developing our first city strategic plan while we were in the planning process for this project. This added a significant amount of value to the overall departmental efforts, and the city's vision here, we keep this at the forefront in all of the work that we're doing, particularly with respect to this plan. And this strategic plan is intended to operationalize all of the strategies in the city strategic plan within our departmental plans and clearly identify implementation steps to support the overall vision of the city strategic plan. And this aligns most closely with the strategic objectives in the city strategic plan of economic prosperity and affordability, as well as mobility. This is a high-level overview of the process that we have embarked on. So we convened a steering committee of 35 members across multi-facets and multidisciplines from the community in October of 2018, and we worked with them to develop the scope of work for the consultant solicitation. Then in April of 2019, we brought on HRNA with Nelson Nygaard to focus on the mobility and transportation space, and then Interborough to help identify some community partnerships for outreach. The consultants conducted a strengths, challenges, opportunities, aspirations, and results analysis, of which Mr. Kluster and I are going to go through and hit some highlights on in this presentation, and some research on background. And I just want to stress that this process builds upon a lot of the community efforts of past planning, like recently Southtown, South Division, the West Side, and the Granville Avenue plans. The strategy development, so we started very early on with more than 80 recommendations, and we can't complete all of those within a 3 to 5 time frame. So we focused with the community engagement efforts on focus groups to help us refine those. So now we're going to begin to move towards some of the implementation.
So from a high level, talking about the research done by the consultants and the background analysis, we'll start with the strengths from Grand Rapids. Thinking about our vision statement of being nationally recognized, in a lot of ways we are nationally recognized. As a collaborative community, we have regional transit partnerships. We're well known for our public-private partnerships. We are an innovative community with the May Mobility Pilot Project. We're a data-driven city. We do have a very robust economy, and we're nationally recognized for that. We're on a lot of lists. Our economy is growing at 2 times the rate of the state and the national economies. We do have a very strong economic development ecosystem. Locally, regionally, and statewide, we have a lot of partners that have assisted us in our efforts. We have a robust infrastructure built for neighborhood economic development with 6 corridor improvement authorities and a business improvement district, as well as many well-organized neighborhood business associations. We have a robust mobility network for car, bus, bike, parking, and walking. And then we also are known for our civic commitment to improving mobility. It is a topic of many conversations. So looking at where we've been, this what you see here is pretty obviously apparent an upward trajectory in terms of the economic growth in Grand Rapids since emerging from the Great Recession. So in 2010, in the at the low, sort of in the middle there, you'll see a tremendous amount of investment in the city of Grand Rapids since 2010. That investment is both local and increasingly from outside of the city and outside of the state, both from a lending and a development perspective. Additional strong signs of economic prosperity in the aggregate in the city of Grand Rapids. So there's been strong job growth since 2010, with several sectors really sort of leading the way. That's healthcare and manufacturing. But there are others as well in the retail and professional and scientific sectors. The consultants' research points to continued growth in the healthcare industry and advanced manufacturing. These are areas where we have particular strengths and assets in the community. Unemployment has fallen significantly, consistent with trends across the country. You'll see in January of 2010, unemployment rates of 15%. January of 2019, that rate is 4% for the city of Grand Rapids. And what that's led to is strengthening financial position for the city. Amazingly, the income tax revenue in 2010, $52.6 million. In 2019, it was 105, a doubling of income tax revenue for the city of Grand Rapids. As you're all well aware, the city of Grand Rapids, through its economic development programs, has supported a significant amount of this investment that's occurred in the community. Over the last 10 years, more than $2.3 billion, billion with a B, supported through economic development programs and more than 9,000 jobs. Additional strengths identified by the consultant, in addition to these, Grand Rapids does have big city amenities. It makes it an attractive place to visit, particularly compared to other similarly sized cities. The cost of living, from a national perspective, is a significant advantage over East and West Coast cities and larger metros. And then again, we have a very strong economic development ecosystem, which we sometimes take for granted, that has really supported the work that we've been able to accomplish so far.
So just for some strengths on the mobility side, we've really made a lot of investments in transit and parking over the last decade. And I just want to highlight the importance of the Vital Streets program and leveraging federal and state resources to help advance complete streets and green infrastructure. The region is blessed to have investments in bus rapid transit. So the Silver Line project and the soon to be completed Laker Line project are 2 great examples of that. But we've also been testing a lot of mobility innovation. So the May Mobility project that is circulating in downtown is a great example of that. We also have some additional strengths that the consultants identified as there's a strong civic commitment to improving mobility, and we do have regional transportation infrastructure and transit infrastructure here, unlike other portions of the state and in the Midwest.
So for all of those positive aspects, we of course still have challenges as a community. Many of the challenges are not unique to Grand Rapids. They're commonly seen in communities experiencing the kind of growth that we have over the past 10 years. And in fact, some of the challenges become more acute with the rapid pace of growth. So we are not in a position to rest on our laurels and be satisfied with where we have come. And we should be clear that opportunity is not created in a vacuum. It's created as a result of multiple inputs and influences, including our work. Neither did challenges come about in a vacuum. So they, too, have come about because of multiple influences and inputs, including our work. So as our equity statement in the strategic plan says, racial inequities have been baked into government. So therefore, we're taking this opportunity and developing this plan to center equity in our efforts going forward and to be intentional about what we want for the next chapter in Grand Rapids. Digging into these challenges a little bit, racial disparities are well documented. You've seen these tables before. They're manifested, these disparities are manifested along race and ethnicity lines as well as geography. Median income, for instance, for the white population is double that of the black population. Poverty rates for black and Hispanic residents is double that of the white population. Unemployment is double and triple in minority communities. The disparities go beyond these sort of traditional measures shown here, and they include disparities in business ownership, home ownership, access to capital, and other indicators of wealth and prosperity.
And we'll also want to highlight, too, that these disparities are also experienced on the mobility side of things. Access to a job is paramount in the community, but not owning a car is very difficult to access much of the growing employment. So there's some of the tables that are listed on here really show that black residents of the city are less likely to own a vehicle as a household, and that means that their transportation burdens are greater, as well as the map on the right-hand side aligns a lot with the neighborhoods of focus. So the plan outlines a community-defined approach for growth and opportunity, and the strategies in the plan center equity and implementation and decision-making related to economic development and mobility programs and investments. Growth and opportunity do not have to be mutually exclusive, and the intent of the plan is to continue to support and develop a robust economy, but one with opportunity for all residents, employees, and businesses. On many scales, in fact, from the company level to the national level, the acceleration and upper limits on economic growth and wealth generation are enhanced when the full diversity of the community is included and has access to opportunity. Strategies in the plan, therefore, will be implemented in a targeted way to advance the economic equitably. Recognizing this, we know that opportunity is not created in a vacuum, and that keeping our decision-making strategically focused on equitable access and better recognition of opportunities to collaborate will lead to more equitable access to opportunity. So one thing we want to show is what the difference is between the traditional approach and this type of approach. Because of the identified challenges and the opportunities within the city's purview, both directly and through its influence and partnerships, it's critical to take this different approach. The equitable approach, as opposed to traditional, really starts asking for whom, who benefits, and who will be burdened when making policy and investment decisions. New jobs, it's great, but in an equitable approach, we ask, who are the jobs for whom? Who gets to participate in the creation of policy? You can see other examples here of how an equitable approach requires targeted strategies. If we're to be effective in this approach, it requires closer coordination, both internally and among partners. We won't accomplish much on our own.
Continuing on with this evaluation, so what do we aspire to achieve through this plan and the implementation of the strategies? These aspirations tie pretty much directly to the city's vision statement. So we aspire to be an equitable city where there's opportunity for a high quality of life, but where neither one's race nor ethnicity determine how one experiences that opportunity. We aspire to growth, to have a robust economy, but to be a place of opportunity where there are pathways for all residents, businesses, and employees to have financial growth and stability. We aspire towards mobility and a safe community where all have access to safe, affordable, and convenient mobility options. And then we aspire to have the capacity to have the resources necessary to deliver on these, to be an innovative, collaborative, and welcoming city. In order to, economic development and mobility can be construed as very broad bodies of work. And in order to sort of focus our conversations and be clear about the work that we do, we've identified these 6 focus areas. From an economic development perspective, we talk about our work now being in business development, in real estate development, and in neighborhood business districts. This obviously is partly due to aligning with the infrastructure that's been built for economic development. And then in mobility, we talk about the 3 focus areas of transportation demand management, Vision Zero, and parking. So there's lots of technical jargon and acronyms, but these are the areas that we talk about now as our focus areas. And there's very clearly overlap. So if we're working on a large economic development project downtown, that has transportation demand management impacts for the community. If we're working in neighborhoods, infrastructure and Vision Zero really need to be considered in our investments. Or whether we're working in an industrial park helping a manufacturer expand, there need to be various ways to get to those jobs that are created and the opportunities that will exist through the economic development projects. So collaboration and targeted strategic investments within these 6 focus areas are going to be critical to ensuring the greatest impact. So now getting into what are we going to do? Where are we going now? Consistent with the city's strategic plan, we talk about sort of high-level goals as objectives, and then each of these objectives has strategies under them. From an economic development perspective, we have 5 objectives. The first being information, to address information and social capital gaps. We need to do a much better job communicating not just about what we do, but why we do it and how people can participate. Related to incentives, to align our incentives with equity goals, we'll update the approach to deploying them, enhancing access for small businesses and historically marginalized communities of color. Small businesses, from our work related to small businesses, we'll be addressing barriers to access to capital and to resources that are available through the economic development ecosystem. Neighborhoods, addressing geographic disparities to utilize the robust infrastructure that's been created with additional resources and programming to support implementation of those plans that have been developed by local stakeholders. And then economic growth, promoting long-term economic growth both for those calling Grand Rapids home and for residents and businesses that may consider calling Grand Rapids home. This aligns very closely with the city's strategic plan to make Grand Rapids a destination city, knowing that tourism, convention business, et cetera, supports small locally owned businesses.
And just really quickly, there are 7 of them related to mobility. The first is aligning our resources. So we have a lot more resources, from Vital Streets and federal and state, but how do we align those to advance other things like Vision Zero, safety, and other equity goals? Transportation demand management, it's how we're managing the demand for the transportation system, for parking, for the use of transit and other mobility options. Curb management, the public space that's out there is going to change dramatically. It already has changed in the last 5 years, and it's going to continue to change for services for freight and goods delivery, or Lyft, or Uber, and other types of services. Capacity, both internal and external. How are we aligning with the different resources that we need to be able to work on some of these projects? Asset management, how are we looking for what we're doing today, but how are we going to take care of all of it in the future, especially for programs and different types of infrastructure that's being built. Communication, very similar to the economic development. We have a lot of tools at our disposal, but how are we communicating what we have, what's available, and how can we communicate that better? And then the last is strategic partnerships. Unlike on the economic development side, there are a lot of less traditional, and we need to try to forge those partnerships, whether they're public, private, institutional, and nonprofit.
Those were the objectives. We'll talk a little bit about the strategies now. The full list of 13 strategies related to the 5 economic development objectives are included in the executive summary. There are 5 strategies listed here that are identified as high priority near term, and that will be evaluated as part of the upcoming fiscal year 21 budget cycle. The first, related to information, is to improve the accessibility of the city's economic development services. A cohesive and consistent communication plan to inform, educate, and empower. The second strategy under incentives is to design and implement an equitable development scorecard for incentives. This is really to align the deployment of incentives with equity goals. We'll revise applications to identify both global and targeted project-specific opportunities that can be drawn out through a different evaluation. Strategy 3.2, related to small businesses to collaborate and integrate with the Office of Equity and Engagement on the equal business opportunity and micro-local business programs to build capacity and utilization of micro-local business, but also to be specific about women and minority-owned businesses in private development projects, very close alignment with the city's strategic plan. Strategy 4.1, expanding staffing and programs to support corridor improvement authorities to accelerate, again, the implementation of the plans that have been developed by those boards and community stakeholders, bringing new tools and resources for those boards. And then the last one you'll see listed here is a little bit of a longer-term strategy. It's not something that can be completed within 12 months, but to enhance the success of maturing companies, align new funding sources and dedicated facilities. So this is related to the Smart Zone, although it doesn't have to be exclusive to the Smart Zone, focused on identifying those opportunities to help second stage companies. There's really a lot of infrastructure for startup businesses, but for those established businesses, small businesses that are looking to and have the ability to grow, what additional resources can be provided. And the recommendation of the consultant obviously is to focus on the assets that exist in the community around healthcare innovation and advanced manufacturing. In addition to these, they're not listed as the 12-month strategies, but there are low-hanging fruit related to business attraction with community partners, Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., Experience Grand Rapids, The Right Place, the Chamber to build our efforts around attracting global businesses to Grand Rapids, and then aligning and empowering boards, really an internally focused strategy to be clear about when we're asking any of the 90 people that serve on our economic development boards to participate, how can we be more clear and inform them as to how their work contributes to the overall body of work related to the equity goals of the Economic Development Office.
We're in the home stretch, I promise. So strategies on the mobility side. So the first one is really to try to align our capital and asset management infrastructure to lead with safety first, and how we're trying to make walking, biking, and driving around much easier and safer for the public, and aligning that with our equity needs. The second is, we've talked a lot in my time here about parking, so really focusing on a decision tool and aligning that with economic development to better understand where, how much, and when for making investments in public parking. The third item is to try to do more pilot projects around transportation demand management. What does that mean? So in the downtown context, that's very different because of the infrastructure that we have versus what it means in a neighborhood business district versus an employer that's could be located inside the city or just outside the city, and how we can get residents access to the employment opportunities. So those three different areas. And then the last is just probably the biggest theme throughout this project is how can we be more communicative about all of the programs and policies, and better about engaging and change management. When we are going to make changes, how are we being more thoughtful and intentional about how we're talking about that? And this has some implications for the budget.
Just from a high level, the implementation of these strategies will require additional resources. So when we talk about information, developing a communication strategy, when we talk about working with small businesses to expand the capacity of minority and women-owned businesses and micro-local businesses, we'll need resources to develop programs that eliminate barriers. Neighborhoods, additional resources to leverage the infrastructure of corridor improvement authorities. And then related to economic growth, we'll be evaluating authority budgets to advance investments in those business development assets, that both from a financing and facilities perspective.
So we're going to just kind of head towards the wrap up. So for accountability, as we move forward, we intend to implement and deliver on this plan. We're going to update and enhance our dashboard. So the first is, this is an excerpt of the Economic Opportunity Dashboard. We also will provide updated metrics in the city strategic plan. as well as additional metrics that will be specifically related to these strategies. I just want to highlight the importance of we are intentional to do continued engagement for those that participated, whether it's the 3 co-chairs that are here, the four co-chairs, the steering committee, or if you participated in a focus group. We've been gathering all of the email addresses to help keep them engaged in the process. And then we will provide regular updates to Economic Development Project Team, as well as the Mobile GR Commission. This is an iterative process. The plan has strategies that go in the 3 to 5 years. The objectives won't change, but implementation of the strategies will respond to the current situation that's on the ground. So with that, the last piece is this concludes our staff portion of this, but we wanted to give an opportunity to a couple of the co-chairs to provide you with their perspective and insight and experience in the process. So thank you.
Great. Welcome.
Who wants to go first? Aaron is.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about this process. You know, I'm standing here as, you know, sort of the poster child for privilege in this community, and wondered, you know, from the very beginning what role I could play in a process like this. But I've lived in Grand Rapids my whole life. I own a business in Grand Rapids, and I think that equity and some of the disparities that you saw on the slides are really the biggest challenge that we have in front of us right now as a community. And if we can start to move the needle on some of those things, then I think a lot of other things, from workforce development and all those other types of challenges that we have, will begin to be more manageable. You know, I say that from a place of privilege, knowing that that's going to necessarily mean change for me and for this city. You know, this process was extremely exhaustive. It took us about a year, maybe 9 months longer than we originally anticipated. But that was necessary, really, to do the work that needed to happen. Can't say enough about the staff, Jono and Josh and their staffs, and the amount of energy that was put into this, as well as the whole community. There were a lot of people who had a lot of opportunities to use their voice in this process, and I'm encouraged by that outcome. You know, the disparities that you saw are a result of systems that have been put in place a long, long time ago. Systems that my ancestors put in place, knowingly or unknowingly. In order for that to change, we need systems to help change it. It's not going to change on its own. And this is part of those systemic changes that need to happen. I think that if this commission and if the staff is willing to stand behind this plan, things will necessarily change in this community. Some people will like that, and some people will not like it. I think I stand here today with 2 asks of you all. And the first one is to be courageous, because this is not going to be easy. And every project, everything that happens will likely come before you in some way or another, either here in this chamber or in a private conversation that, oh, I know, but this one's different. Oh, I know, but if we don't, then we can't. And I would just ask you to be courageous, like not what I've come to realize during this process is not all development, not all economic development, not all projects, not all, you know, things that the city touches, not all economic activity is necessarily good for this city. And not every development is necessarily good just because it's a development. We have an opportunity to use the tools that the city has to make a difference in how we do development and economic development in the city. And there are folks who will not appreciate that, will not want to do that, and that's fine. Then they don't need to use those tools, right? But as a community, you know, you all are tasked with using our taxpayer dollars and programs that are created to help things out, and to do it in a way that benefits the community, and that means making some hard choices. So I ask you to be courageous as those choices come before you, to support the staff that will make recommendations towards you, that will be hard to, you know, to push forward, and will take some effort, and you'll meet with resistance. But that's necessary to make good change. The second ask I have is just that you continue to support the staff that you have. They talked about at the end there the resources they need. I'm continually amazed with both departments, particularly economic development, though, the amount of work that gets done with a limited amount of resources and staff is incredible. And they are working extremely hard on behalf of this community, and I'm extremely grateful for the work that them and their staffs put in. I'd ask you to continue to support that and allow them to have the opportunity to have resources that allow them to put some of these things into place. It's going to take some effort. It's not going to be easy. And probably some more staff and budget are going to be necessary to do it right. I wasn't aware that we had doubled our tax revenue in the last 5 years, or 9, but you know, it's a real opportunity. So I would encourage you to do that. Thanks for the chance.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your work. Hello. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. It has truly been a privilege, and I was really challenged to step forward and challenge some of the work that was going forth that I was reading and was very uncomfortable with, and especially not seeing a black face being represented when some of these decisions were being made. So I thank this team for supporting me and listening to me. I thank you for allowing it to happen. For me, the past is what dictates our future. And we have really been challenged to create a space that is welcoming for all. What does unity look like? I'm not sure, but I have a paintbrush I've been working with. I really want to see this. I want to be able to embrace my sisters and brothers that don't look like me, but it's been hard with what we've been faced with in the past. And so I'm asking that the work that we put into this report, this plan, that it happens. I stand on everything and I second everything that Aaron said, because this has been emotional. And we have challenged people at a space. They've become very uncomfortable. And I thought I was going to get put out of a few meetings. But I was okay with that as long as they heard what I was bringing forth from what I was hearing from my community and what our past has looked like. It needs to be different. We deserve different. You are no better than I am. We bleed the same. Our money looks the same. And together, I believe we can make a difference in our city. It looks good on paper, but what is it going to look like when we're out there walking and working it? Who's going to be involved? Who's going to benefit? Unity for all, opportunities for all need to exist. It has been so one-sided. It's unbelievable, and it's painful. So I challenge the city officials to take this plan and move the needle on it. Seriously. I'm going to hold everyone accountable, including myself. We have to do this. Together, we can do this. And I believe for our young people, when they see this happening, like if they were to sit down to really come maybe into a space like this and someone work with them and tell them, hey, we're doing this for you, what would that look like? What would they have to say? I think opportunities can be created behind this plan that's going to involve our young people to help them make better decisions in the community. All the violence that's happening right now is because they don't see a future. It needs to be different. It needs to be presented to them different. You know, Commissioner Moody and Commissioner Jones, from the work that we've done in the past with the young people, there's ways. We have been very creative with doing things. Now, some of them got out there and made some bad decisions, but some of them really took what they learned and did something great with it. And I believe that is going to come from this plan. I believe a lot more is going to come from this plan. But it's going to take you to support it and all the effort and the people that put effort into it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, I guess we will take any questions or
All right, well, I have one clarifying question, and then I'll turn
I'm
to
sorry, but
Commissioner
You-
Isasi,
No, we're good.
since she has served on this committee
Yeah.
since its inception. So I'll give you a first chance to make a comment and questions, and I'll turn down here and see if there's others. So, Jono, I just have one clarifying question. So on slide 6, the data related to job growth and unemployment is 2019 data. I'm curious if the data on slide 10 is also, it doesn't seem to align to me.
I'm sorry.
So is that 2019 data, or is that ACS data for our, I'm just curious.
This data you're talking about?
Yeah, so this unemployment data,
Yeah.
is that 2019 data?
So this
Or is it
da-
ACS data?
It's ACS data. So
From
this
what,
is a screen-
2017?
Yeah, this is a screenshot from our economic opportunity dashboard.
Oh, it's actually 2016?
So it's all been,
2013 to 16?
yeah, 17,
It was in 17, but it goes back the prior 3 average years.
right.
Okay, so I'm just, when we get updated data that aligns with the other data that we have, can you send us that updated data?
We can, and we actually have that data already pulled and prepared to be published. It won't look exactly like this because we're switching to Socrata,
Okay,
the new software that the city's using for its reporting, but the data's already
Great.
pulled and ready to be published.
okay, thank you. It just, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
To have updated, because I see down here 2014, that's 6
Yeah.
years old now.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's changed in our city over the last 9 years, my guess is that a lot of this data is, has changed at least a bit, so it'd be nice to have updated.
Mayor, if I could, I talked with our equity office about making sure that we get an updated lens as we come into the next budget process. So
Okay,
I
good.
had that same conversation as well.
Okay, good, that'd be very helpful. All right, so Commissioner Isasi?
I'm sorry, Mayor, were we going to hear from Becca? I just wanted to make sure that,
I'm sorry.
That's a good reason to interrupt me.
I thought I heard you say no,
Oversight,
but I wasn't
no.
sure.
Yeah, it's not their oversight, but yeah. This process has been over a year for us to do. And I think one of the things that has been challenging is really putting an equity lens over the work that has traditionally that's not even a conversation that's being had. And I want to say that the people in the room that were with us, the co-chairs and the staff, really, it took so long because we pushed so hard. Because we had to stop and say, this is not right, this is not the way that we need to do this. But one of the things that I want to lift up is that throughout this process, one of the things that I know to be true is that the staff within the city knew what to do. And sometimes we need to invest in our staff, invest in the people that are here who already know what we can and cannot do and what should be done. I think sometimes in the city we look externally to get validation on here's the evaluation, here are the people that are going to come in, and these facilitators are going to come in and tell us what we already know, and that really pushes the work a year down the line. I really want us to be thinking about how we do things differently, how we invest in the staff that's already here, how letting them lead in the way that they need to lead and not in the traditional form, right? Like I understand we're a municipality, we have governance and these other things, but really they had the answers. They had most of the answers to this work. They might not have been able to put it in a nice package like the consultants were able to do, but throughout the process, this is not a surprise to any of us. So we embarked on this process, but we really could have just been looking internally to kind of have some of these answers. So really, as you're going through these processes and as you're putting equity over the work that's being done department by department, really look at what would that look like to invest those dollars back into the city and back into the staff, to give them the capacity to do this type of work as well. No one knows this better than us. We might not know the national models, but that's research that we can do. I would just challenge to try to do things a little differently. And also invest in this team. You have great staff, and they're pretty dope. And what they were able to do and to pull together for us, push our work forward, keep us on task with staff changes and everything that they experienced throughout the process. I can't speak more highly for the integrity that they approached the work, the intentionality, and I know that it was probably a very stressful year having us in their ear every week, telling them, nope, that's not right. No, let's go back. Not enough people. We need to go back to this again. So, as you move into 2020, we're in a new space. We're in a new place. There's new opportunities. to look at the way that you take the equity conversation within the organization and look at it a little differently. So this is going to take a lot of work, and it's going to be a heavy lift. But I think, to Aaron's point, it's going to have to be courageous, and things cannot be done the same way because we're going to be situated in the same way. And that's not okay. So I just challenge you to do some of those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bypass you. So thanks. Okay. Commissioner Yasasi?
Thanks. Thank you all for the presentation. I think, I'm trying to think of all the meetings that occurred over time, and I think just the sheer focus of bringing together large groups of people to really focus on change management. I mean, I think this is what this project is as well. You're really sort of pushing us to think differently. When we think about work, sometimes we say equity lens, and I think that doesn't go far enough because we can take that lens away or put it, decide to apply it in different spaces. But this is, to me, really the opportunity for framework of those just really needing to make sure we have targeted investments. I did want to say on slide 5, you talked about the growth since the recession and talked about the investment. I think I just wanted to add into some of the other conversations at the meeting is that there is a real recognition that not everybody recovered in the same way from the last recession. And as we think about, today we had our Fiscal Services Committee and our City Treasurer talked about geopolitical concerns, local concerns. And so I think it's important to remember, because I know I've heard you guys talk about this, that not everybody recovered in the same way. So I think that's important for that slide. The other thing that we talked about in one of the sessions was around communication, and that communication is very broad, and sometimes it's technical communication, sometimes it's communication for information, and sometimes it's communication for influencing or understanding. So I'll look forward to hearing more about that. And then I'll say one other thing, and then I have more of a technical question, is really, I think this is so, as I opened the packet, I read through this, and I had seen it before, but then really going through what's on the rest of our resolutions, or what's on the rest of our agenda for today, it really struck the chord. What is the opportunity? I've had a chance to work with Aaron in some other ways, and I'll tell you, there's so many businesses that are doing these things voluntarily, whether it's providing additional work supports, career progressions programmings. These are not seen as things that restrict business development, but rather things that grow businesses, that become, I think I've talked to Aaron about, how do you become, really attract talent, and doing things in this way, they're not restrictions, they're really add-ons. And if we want to continue to invest in talent and bring talent here, we need to understand, going to that equitable approach. So I already started writing some things down that perhaps we could take from workforce development. And then the technical question that I have is around Objective 3 on small businesses. It talks about the time frame being 3 to 5 years, and also talks about a successful 1-year pilot. So I just wondered from, if the pilot was successful, why was the time frame 3 to 5 years? So if you could speak to that. Thanks.
Thanks,
Can you tell me which strategy exactly that is?
3.1, yes. Thank you, City Manager.
I apologize.
Maybe I can help while he's looking at it. So as I recall, this is the effort that we begin collaborating with the Chamber and DGRI around small business advocate, particularly for retail space. And so we will be announcing, as a matter of fact, in another week or so, our strategy and wrap focus for that. And so the pilot really hasn't started yet. And so we're going to start it. We only have 1-year funding for it. It hasn't been permanently committed for that funding, so we have to reevaluate that again in this year's budget. And so I think as we begin something that we haven't started, we need to figure out the results before we can begin to scale it and expand it. And so I think that's the intent, but I'll let Mr. Klooster.
It is the intent. Okay. Thank you, City Manager.
Thank
So
you.
that was something that, again, with a 14-month process, we had to respond to things that were happening. And so the city's partnership with DGRI and the Chamber is something that has been approved and will move forward. And so as opposed to having to start that in the implementation of this plan, it's something that will work on over the next year. And then I guess it does say build upon the successes. We assume that there will be successes from that we can build upon moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I just want to echo the words of the steering committee co-chairs. I think, I got to go through this as a member of a nonprofit, and the meetings were always, I think, well attended. Different voices made sure. I remember one meeting I had a lot of questions, and you kept letting me ask all my questions. So I think you really made sure that you weren't just convening people, but that you were listening and honoring what their lived experiences were in this plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Moody?
Yes, I want to thank you for this presentation today. I truly believe in economic development, especially for all. I have two questions. I didn't necessarily look at a slide number, but I was just concerned with the fact that you said that you were going to improve on accessibility. And does that accessibility mean that in terms you're going to improve on communication or making the community accessible to this mobility strategic plan?
It refers to both. I mean, that was some of the criticism that we had received a little bit from disability advocates of Kent County and what they mean, excuse me, from accessibility. But to us, it means accessibility of all mobility resources, whether you're coming into downtown and you're parking, whether you need to use transit, whether you need to use any of the new mobility services. How do you know where they are, and how do we communicate those to individuals? There is also an accessibility component to economic development as well, and how we're communicating the different tools we have to all of the different stakeholders to make sure everybody knows what resources are available.
Okay. My next question is, you mentioned the scorecard, and I want to know, how do you plan to evaluate the scorecard?
Yeah, the scorecard is something that we anticipate working on in partnership, in particular with individuals who participated in the focus groups. I think we had some really deep learnings there as to what we can do. But we think about that, I think, in a couple different ways. It's not a novel idea. It's been done in other communities. We think about it in terms of, as Commissioner Azazi said, there are things that businesses and corporations and individuals are doing in this community that we can elevate already, and we can draw those out through that scorecard. There are things that we can provide additional resources to support, things like eliminating barriers for minority contractors in private development projects. And then there are things that we can incentivize using the tools that the city has at its disposal, things that we can partner with the private sector that will help move the needle on these equity goals as well. So it's a little bit of a three-phase approach: support the good things that are happening and draw those out, provide additional resources to achieve some of the goals, and then incentivize as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Park?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank you both, Jono and Josh, for your work, and all the steering committee members, but Aaron and Becca, Carlos, and Saini. I want to publicly recognize Saini. Yesterday won the 2020 Nolan Gross Business Leader Award at the Urban League breakfast. So that's pretty exciting. I also want to give a shout out to Joe, who insisted at the beginning of this that it be called an equitable economic development plan, which really set the tone for moving it from a traditional approach to that different approach. And I just am thankful for that all of the hard data is included in the report. Yesterday Denny Sturdivant gave us the statistics for Kent County about home ownership from white families to black families, and if you scale that to Grand Rapids, it's even worse. And I think it's important for the public to know that our median income for the city of Grand Rapids is below 200% of the federal poverty line, which is how low income is defined. And so we do have a long way to go, and I think that this is a great step in the right direction. And I have my certain things that I'm excited about. Number 4.3, it's not on the urgent list, but I love the strategy for 4.3. I think it's super creative. In fact, we're going to be voting on in a few minutes about our wedge lot. We have a parking lot downtown that we were able to hold on to that now we can leverage for a project that can meet multiple objectives for the city. And so that kind of creativity, I think, is going to be really excited. And I also appreciate the challenge from all the co-chairs to stick with the plan once we adopt it. But I just want to thank everybody for their work, and to Joe for setting the table and setting the tone and putting it on the right path.
So I'll go next to Commissioner Jones, then Commissioner Lanier, and then I'll wrap this up so we can get to our action items because we still have a full agenda. So Commissioner Jones?
Thank you, Mayor, and I want to begin by saying thank you to staff for your leadership in this work, as well as to the co-chairs and all members who participated in this work. I think it was Sam Cooke who said that it's been a long time coming, and so I am most pleased that we have this before us, and I think that as the words that have been spoken from the co-chairs in particular, there is a sense of urgency, I think, that's underway with regards to this particular effort, simply because we have an opportunity to create a narrative and create a direction that will make Grand Rapids, I hope, a model city as it pertains to inclusive economic development. And so I'm excited about the potential that this plan holds. And you're right, Becca, I think in particular, said she talked about this is a heavy, heavy lift, but that's okay. I think any change of this magnitude requires significant lift, and I think that we have, I do believe that we have the resources and the will to carry this out. And something happened on last week that I think is a preview of what this type of plan could lead us to where, what happened last week could be the rule and not the exception. And I'm speaking of, on last Wednesday, I had the opportunity to be present at the press conference as the announcement was made about the purchase of McKay Tower here in downtown Grand Rapids. A very well-established commercial building and residential building in downtown Grand Rapids that was purchased by two of our local tribes and their development groups, Wasaback and Gun Lake Investments, came together and they purchased a building that is 100% occupied, and essentially they were able to purchase something that, as a Native historian stated that day, actually sits in the village that the tribes once lived. There's a lot of irony to that. There's a number of stories that could be told, but his closing remarks was, "We're home." And this idea that we have before us in downtown Grand Rapids a significant piece of real estate that's owned by people of color speaks volumes. And so, again, my hope is that this plan can lead us to a place where that is not the exception, but that's the rule. So, again, kudos to all who have been involved, and I can't wait to see us lean in more on this.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I'll add my thanks to you for your early leadership and support in making this happen. So, thank you. Commissioner Lanier?
Yes. Thank you so much. What a great presentation this morning. I have a couple questions, observations. The first is, it's written in draft form, so I'm just curious to know, like, what are the next steps to get this to a final stage? And I know you had mentioned earlier that there's a larger report. We have the executive summary, and just curious if we could get that printed so that it could be, more of a reference guide, and perhaps it shouldn't be printed until it's at its final stage. I didn't know if you were considering having a public hearing so that the public can kind of see this and weigh in, or if you're looking for us to provide feedback, and that's what'll make it final. So that's one of my first questions, if you just want to quickly address that.
Sure. So we had made the presentation to the steering committee that had participated throughout the process. And the Mobile GR Commission has gotten the presentation of this plan, and the Economic Development Project team. And so, as the mayor had said initially, this is not, we're not asking for a vote on this. This is really a departmental operations plan. And we will, after today, get it published on our website. I'm happy to print copies for anybody who wants it. And we'll remove the draft at that point.
So just after presenting it is what made it draft?
Yeah,
Okay.
and again, I think similar to the city strategic plan, if updates need to be made about the implementation of strategies along the way, I think we feel comfortable doing that in the future.
Great, thank you. And then my next question is tied to the unemployment data that you shared. And I'm just curious to know, as you were unpacking this, and I'm not sure who was all on the committee, but I was curious to know if Michigan Works had been engaged to kind of look at some of the unemployment data, because I know oftentimes there are families who may have multiple part-time jobs, and if we're looking at that, how do you look at that type of data and decide whether there's unemployment or not? If they're kind of in this stage where they're, combining multiple part-time jobs in order to make ends meet. So was there any involvement with Michigan Works, because they would have the unemployment data, I think, based on the population they're serving?
Yeah, West Michigan Works participated in the focus groups for this process. I think the unemployment data is informative, and I think what you're referring to is and underemployment, right? That there are nuances to that. I think the data that we have informs the plan, and I'm not sure that I think on its face it's pretty indicative of the situation. Where there is nuance, you're absolutely right, related to and underemployment, but I'm not sure that it would have necessarily changed from the body of work that economic development does. I'm not sure that it would have necessarily changed how we implement the strategies.
Yeah, see, I think actually that if I'm not listed as being unemployed because I have these multiple jobs, then I will be missed as you're trying to implement a strategy to address those who are unemployed. So I think somehow we may want to start looking at people who fall into that category, so that then, whoever that person is can then be impacted by the strategies that are implemented. And I think that requires kind of looking at that a little bit deeper, because this population, people who fall into that category, are oftentimes missed because they aren't appearing as unemployed. So just take that into consideration as you're implementing those strategies. The other comment or question was, I just wanted to make the comment about the impact to existing businesses and the strategy to try and help those, businesses who have been around for a while, for them to grow and trying to impact the needs that they have. Because I do agree that there are a lot of programs now recently for startups, but not so much those who are trying to make the next leap or trying to maintain before failing sometimes. So thank you for that. And then, I have a suggestion about increasing the minority and women-owned businesses and their becoming vendors of the city of Grand Rapids. And my challenge is for one of you to walk through, and someone in city staff, to walk through the process step by step, side by side, with someone that's trying to become a vendor. I recently, probably a couple weeks ago, had feedback about how cumbersome the process is and how confusing it is and how it's sending you places and then, it's adding 5 steps and it could have only been 1. And I know that that's frequently tied to changes are being made, and if you're not spending time kind of beta testing that, I know when we did the website, Becky Jo and her team did a lot of beta testing, so we may want to beta test. I mean, that may be a simple, quick, low-hanging fruit, simple thing to do that will remove, I think, a lot of barriers for people who are trying to become vendors of the city. And then I yesterday had the opportunity to speak on a panel for MLK, and, MLK's quote about the 2 Americas came up. I think I was the one who brought it up, but anyway, I also talked about there being 2 Grand Rapids, right? So people can live and navigate in this city and have one completely, extremely different experience living here than another population. And I think what you've shared here in your report actually identifies that clearly. I think the Forbes article identifies that clearly. And so I am happy to know that that's on your radar. And I think, even prior to the economic development start of this, developing this strategic plan, it became apparent. And then your data set made it even more obvious to the public. And so I'm really happy that we have a plan that is attempting to address that. And your co-chairs who have spoken, I think they've given us some really wise and strong advice. I think be courageous is probably going to be quoted multiple times. Thanks, Aaron. And the unity for all needs to exist from Siney, I think is the piece that has been missing. And as they've encouraged us, I think Becca did this about supporting staff, I kind of want to hear from them a little bit about, like, what are the examples of lack of support so that we can know how to best support? Because, I think that's important for us to support the work of staff. And if we're being challenged to do so, I think it's important for us to know if we're missing or making the mark, if we could just hear some examples of how we can best support staff as we're doing this work, because I want the outcomes in here to come to fruition, and I want to be able to support staff better. So I don't know if any of you have any examples. I think, Aaron, you may have spoke to that when you talked about different projects coming and development projects may not, all development projects aren't always right. And so maybe that's a good example of that, and if that's it, that's fine. But I just want to know, even if it isn't here today, if you want to privately talk about it, how we can support staff. I don't want to put you on the spot. And then I think the last point that I want to make, or question that I have, is about, well, it's 2 points that I want to make. The 4.1 is a staffing recommendation or strategy for the SIDS, and I know that many of them are trying to hire corridor improvement managers to try and do their work with this recommendation, kind of help them to not have to spend money on a separate person, and there would be someone who would kind of work closely to administer the work. What are you thinking there?
Sure, very good question. So, as you're aware, and I think all of the commissioners sit on corridor improvement authorities, we have been providing sort of additional structure and information to the boards to help understand exactly what our role is. And one of those things that we're working on and we're bringing is sort of that relationship between the city staff liaison to corridor improvement authorities and the corridor manager, because they are different roles, and there are different roles. And so the staff can provide additional sort of long-term support, I think assistance with, for example, this is not a corridor improvement authority program, but the Third Ward business retention program, right? That's not something that we would envision a corridor manager necessarily developing, building the application, accepting applications, processing the payments, et cetera. There are opportunities to enhance the level of support for corridor improvement authorities with additional city resources.
Okay. And then my last point is, I think it was in December, I had been contacted by students. They're in a GRCC, GRPS program. And it was through the MLive articles about the Third Ward and the disparities that exist there, that they were very interested and intrigued by economic development. And so they invited me to their class, which is on CC's campus, and we kind of talked through it. And I would love for this presentation to come back to them, because they were just like, what can we do and what's going to be done? And I think this would kind of close things out for them. So, John, let's talk about, how to do that, and maybe with co-chairs to kind of circle back to those students to give them more information. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. All right, so with that, I think I'll turn it over to our city manager to close this, and then I'm going to move us along to our next item. So, city manager, you want to close this?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners and staff again. I just want to say how very pleased and proud I am of the work that was done with community, and particularly the staff that's here, both Mr. Closter and Mr. Naramore, as well as, in her absence, Ms. Wood, for the work that was started and all the other support staff. So thank you very much. I think we take it for granted how important this is. There are many economic development directors around this country who couldn't speak of economic opportunity with this kind of cultural sensitivity, and all they can think about is green. So thank you for being able to use all the colors in the with the crayons, if you will, not only green, but the inclusion of everyone else as we talk about economic opportunity. I do want to earlier point about the underemployed. As we have another focused effort around housing, I think as we start to look at the working poor, those that are asset limited, income constrained, that kind of data of those that are excessively cost burdened with housing costs will be more prevalent. So that requires us to have the intersection of some of the other work that we're doing, and we'll make sure that unfolds into this strategy. And regarding next steps, the support staff, I think the staff prioritized, the committee prioritized some of the recommendations, and as we began to develop the budget, this is one component of information that we'll take in consideration of prioritizing some of the budget recommendations. So I think that you will see, particularly as we get to our mid-year work session on the 25th, a little bit more detail around some of the things that we're thinking about doing in terms of operationalizing some of the strategies. So again, thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for being here. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to our third item, and this is a resolution approving a 10-year obsolete property rehabilitation certificate pursuant to PA 146 for the property at 642 Bridge Street. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, Mr. Klooster, you can hang around up here for a little bit.
I'll
So
be
why don't
here
you tell
for
us
a
about
while.
this one? I know we had the public hearing.
Yeah, final approval of a 10-year obsolete property rehabilitation exemption certificate for 642 Bridge Street LLC. Public hearing was held at your last meeting. This is a single-story, 3,400 square foot building determined to be functionally obsolete in 2016, constructed in 1900 and used as a church most recently, although it's been vacant for 10 years.
All right.
The investment, $249,000 by the applicant, $500,000 by the tenant, which is proposed as Cedar Springs Brewing Company. 7.5 full-time equivalent jobs with average wages of $19.50 an hour. Project supported by the West Grand Neighborhood Organization and the West Side Corridor Improvement Authority.
All right, Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, Commissioner?
I just wanted to add sort of extension of this conversation. There's another group, I think Commissioner Jones were on that, for the Right Place and the Brookings Institute work. I think we should make sure we connect there, because I had a conversation with Cindy Brown about what is the cost of a job? What does it actually cost an individual to take a job? Because again, as we shift to equitable economic development, it's great to see the hourly wage, it's great to see jobs created, but also recognizing what does that cost the individual. We have a lot of data around what it what more jobs would do to our local economy, but we don't think about that conversely. So I was told that they would be able to work with Brookings to get that data, because I think that's another education point for our employers.
Yeah, that's a great point, and they're doing really great work. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next it will take us to a resolution establishing an obsolete property rehabilitation district pursuant to PA 146 of 2000, and this is for 1600 Monroe LLC at 1351 Leonard Street, Northwest.
Support.
All right, Mr. Klooster?
Sure, this and the next item are related to a project proposed at 1351 Leonard Northwest. Again, a public hearing was held at your last meeting. This is the former West Leonard Elementary School that Cherry Street Capital is proposing to convert to an event facility. That was approved by the Planning Commission in 2018. The project is a $2.2 million project that will result in 23.5 full-time equivalent jobs with average wages of $17.50 per hour, and the project was supported by the West Leonard Business Association, the West Grand Neighborhood Organization, and the West Side Corridor Improvement Authority.
All right, Commissioners, any questions or comments? Well, it's good to see this property rehabilitated, but I have to say during the public hearing, it made me think about the property at Cherry and Eastern that the same company has owned for, I think, going on a decade now, that has sat there vacant on both,
Yeah,
on both
that's
sides
about
of the street.
that. That's about
And
that
it'd be
too.
really nice to get an update on what the plan is for that.
Yes.
So if maybe you can follow up and let us know, at least myself and our 2 Second Ward commissioners. I know we often get asked about that by the neighborhood.
Sure.
So, all right, so with that, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving a 10-year obsolete property rehabilitation exemption certificate pursuant to PA 146 of 2000 for the same property. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, commissioners, any questions or comments? I know First Ward commissioners, you've been actively engaged in this conversation as support from the neighborhood. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving a brownfield plan amendment for the Vandenberg Center redevelopment project at 111 Lion Street and 200 Monroe Avenue. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, Johnny, you want to tell us about this?
Yep.
We also had a public hearing on this at our last meeting.
You did. This is a brownfield plan amendment for 111 Lion, CWD 111 Lion LLC. This is as we heard at the public hearing, a multi-phase project. 200 Monroe is being renovated. Currently, the first phase of the project proposed by CWD is the renovation of 44,000 square feet of ground floor retail. There have been some announcements about tenants there. And then the second phase would be the renovation of the Fifth Third building at 111 Lion, 206,000 square foot office space, which will provide an opportunity for a new anchor tenant in Grand Rapids. The project is a $116 million project overall. Estimated number of jobs that could be created when the project's fully complete is 350. The brownfield plan amendment specifically contains $5.7 million to be reimbursed to the developer over a 13-year period for lead and asbestos abatement and demolition at those properties. And this project was also supported by the Downtown Development Authority with about $1 million investment for elevator and public infrastructure improvements.
Making it more accessible.
Correct.
All right, commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next it'll take us to a resolution approving a brownfield plan amendment for the Leonard Development Partners LLC redevelopment project, and this is at 415, 419, and 421 Leonard Street Northwest.
So moved.
Okay. Mr. Kluser? Again, we had a public hearing related to this project at our last meeting.
Yep, this, three properties, 415, 419, and 421 Leonard Street. The three existing buildings there would be demolished as a part of the project to make way for a new 23,000 square foot retail and office building. It would be a multi-tenant building with retail on the main floor and office above it. The project is a $4.9 million project with jobs moving into the city from outside of the city. 70 new full-time equivalent jobs with average wages of $37 an hour. This brownfield plan amendment contains about $460,000 in eligible costs for environmental assessment, demolition, lead and asbestos abatement, site preparation, and public infrastructure improvements that would be reimbursed over a 15-year period to the developer, again supported by the West Grand Neighborhood Organization, West Leonard Business Association, and the West Side Corridor Improvement Authority, which have been busy over the last couple months.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, next, commissioners, I see our chief moved up to the front, so I'm assuming this is for the next one. This is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of an option purchase agreement and the eventual acquisition of 1823 and 1815 South Division Avenue for the amount of $800,000 with a total cost not to exceed $880,000. Can I get a motion? All right, Mr. Klusser?
Yes, resolution approving an option agreement with Matthew 2540 Hartside LLC, which does business as In the Image, for two properties on South Division, 1823 South Division, and a small parking lot across the street to the north at 1815 South Division. In order to fulfill the fire department's mission and ensure that all people feel safe and are safe in our community, they've determined that the South Division Fire Station needs to be upgraded. The existing station requires upgrades, but it's cost prohibitive, and the property that it sits on is also not ideal for a modern fire station. Based on the data-driven evaluation by the fire department, 1823 South Division was identified as an ideal property for a new fire station. This option agreement is a land acquisition strategy. The agreement has been negotiated with In the Image, which has already approved the option agreement. The details, as mentioned, the purchase price would be $800,000, which is the appraised value of 1823 South Division. Again, we would also get the lot across the street. The city would deposit $60,000 upon approval of this option, which would be attributable to the purchase price. The city would pay brokerage commission, transfer taxes, and half of the closing costs, as well as 1.75% interest on the purchase price after due diligence between the period of completion of due diligence and closing. So we would have a 60-day due diligence period to evaluate the property, after which we could accept it or terminate the option if it's determined not to be acceptable. In the Image would continue to operate at this property for potentially an extended period of time. Closing would occur upon 30 days' notice from In the Image, not earlier than July 30 of this year, nor later than July 15 of next year. So there is an outside date at which we would take possession of the property. This arrangement really allows the city to facilitate the planning, knowing that property has been secured for the investment. Chief Lehman's here to answer any questions related to the fire department, if there are any. Otherwise, I'll be happy to answer questions as well.
Great, thank you. I'll have the chief come up and see if he wants to add anything. I know we have talked about the need for this for some time. I know a lot of work has gone into it to get us to where we are today. So Chief, anything to add?
Just that we really did a lot of analysis on this site. It's going to allow us to build the size of facility that we need to be able to move forward and provide the coverage to that area of the city. Our responses down to that area need to be, the location of that site needs to be within that couple block range in order for us to provide that coverage, and this was really the ideal site. I'll tell you too, in the future, as we're looking at this replacement of a 96-year-old fire station, that how important it is that when we're able to look forward and acquire property for these types of developments, because we are in a rapidly developing market, and unless we secure property to be able to develop, we're not able to plan for those future replacements. If we go into temporary housing, in order to house a facility like ours, sometimes those costs can add about $1 million to the project, and that's money that's just lost unless and I'd rather take that money and invest in the piece of property that really fits our needs.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, and Mr. Klooster, again, this is a resolution approving an option agreement for the eventual sale and development of a portion of city-owned property at 22 Ottawa Avenue Northwest, or what we often refer to as the Wedge. All right. Actually, can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, Mr. Klooster?
So we'll go from buying property to selling property. This is a resolution that would approve a 12-month option agreement for the eventual sale of a portion of 22 Ottawa Northwest, the Wedge, to Wheeler Development Group. You'll recall it was not long ago, October 22nd, the city put out an RFP listing the property for sale and the goals that we had to, that we wanted to achieve with the development of this property. Those being maximized density and height, consistency with the goals of the GR Forward Plan, project quality and timing, the proposer's financial capacity and ability to complete the project based on their track record, inclusion of residential housing, a portion of which could be reserved for affordable housing, and then a commitment to micro-local businesses and women and minority-owned business contracting. So we are, as we put out this RFP, we're obviously thinking about the presentation that you just got and how we can start piloting and figuring out how we can implement some of those strategies. Proposals were due on December 9, 2019, and 4 proposals were received and evaluated by a committee. That committee consisted of board members of the Downtown Development Authority, Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, Mobile GR Commission, city staff from Mobile GR, Economic Development, Planning Department, and the Executive Office. We also had members from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and DGRI participate in that evaluation with our legal counsel. Based on the committee's review, they are recommending to you providing this 12-month option to Wheeler Development Group based on their proposal, an image of which you'll see here. Included in the proposal, the minimum requirements in order for a proposal to be responsive was simply ground floor retail and 5 floors of parking. That was sort of the minimum that we asked for, but we also asked for as much as possible on top of that. And so the proposal from Wheeler Development Group includes that ground floor retail and the 5 floors of parking, which would be attached to the city's Fulton and Ottawa parking ramp. On top of that, they're proposing 3 floors of office space, approximately 44,000 square feet, 10 floors of residential apartments, approximately 118 apartments, 10 to 20% of which they have indicated could be available to individuals earning below the area median income. On top of those apartments, 5 floors of residential condominiums as well. So there's a mix of for sale, for rent, office, parking, and retail as a part of this proposal. Preliminarily, they estimate that this would be a $55 million investment, and they have offered the greater of $2 million or the appraised value for the property. At this point, the request is simply for approval of the option agreement that would allow staff to work with the developer over the coming months to work out the details of this project. We did ask for a timeline in the proposal, and assuming negotiations can proceed successfully, development could begin yet this year, and the construction of a project like this would take 2 to 2.5 years after commencement. I do have Ryan Wheeler here from Wheeler Development Group, although I did not ask him necessarily to make a presentation, but if you do have questions, they are available. And with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Okay, thanks. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Klooster? Commissioner?
All right. I just have a quick one. So is the parking ramp that's present, that one will stay? I didn't feel like I fully understood if it was going to stay or if they would just build a different one with the 5. Okay, right.
So we did a little bit of due diligence before we did the RFP. So essentially what they would be constructing would align with the existing structure and tie into it so that it would use the ramping mechanism in the existing Ottawa Fulton parking structure.
Okay.
But we built flat floor, so it could be used to support the development, but then in the future could be reused into something else as the developer sees fit. And this next stage, we'll get through that.
Okay.
But we were trying to really be focused on how it could be engineered to use the existing structure so they wouldn't have to do ramping that goes through at an additional cost to the developer. So they can use, it's like an add-on to the existing facility.
Great. And then the ramp goes down and and it kind of goes up. So then would that be the retail space then? Could that, or would you undo one? I don't know how many stories the ramp currently is.
So there's 6 stories,
Okay.
and so this would align, and the bottom floor would actually be built a little bit taller
Okay.
in the proposal to allow for that, so that it would hit about approximately on the 2nd floor of the
Okay.
structure. They'd use the drive lane that exists off of Ionia Street, and then on the ground floor, they'd put utilities and make space for
Okay.
their ground floor retail.
Wow, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Commissioners, any other questions?
I have one question.
Commissioner?
You talked about 10 to 12% of the apartment units being at or below AMI. So I'm guessing that's going to be evolving as the project evolves. So if we could just be stayed up to date on that, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, 10 to 20% is what's listed there.
And as being familiar with the process of moving forward with an option and working out the details, I'm assuming that this full body will also be apprised of final commitments related to minority and women-owned contractors that will be used, and what that will look like as well.
Yes, yeah. The final development proposal would have to come back to you for approval once all the negotiations have been completed. Yeah.
Great. Well, I will add one more thing before I call the question. I am really glad to see height. We talk about this a lot, that the opportunity to build in our city is, a lot of the land that's available is quickly being purchased, and in order to increase the housing units available, especially downtown, we need to go We need to go taller, we need to go up, we need greater density. Downtown doesn't have a height limit for that very reason. And so I'm happy to see proposals that are tall buildings over 20 stories, and I hope we see a whole lot more of them in the future with the limited space that we have available to build in the downtown core. So I'm happy to see that. Commissioner?
Yeah, and I also, height is great, but I think just as we go through this process, I ask that we all keep an open mind that this is a great first proposal that they came up with in, less than, 45 days since we put it out there. And so these things are complex, these things are challenging, these things take creativity, and ultimately, they're going to assume a lot of risk to try to pull something like this off. And so the fact that they're going to pay us what appears to be a fair market price for a piece of ground that's been not utilized and not on the tax rolls for a long time, whatever it ends up being ultimately might not be exactly what they presented today, but that we need to continue to keep an open mind about that. The market and their research will help predicate what it ends up being.
Yeah. Thank you for that point, Commissioner. That's an excellent point. And whenever we are redeveloping, whether it's this parcel city-owned or the Area 4 and 5 that the DDA developed in partnership with Studio Park, it really is a partnership. And we know that we're working together to try to get the highest and best use for that space that meets a number of goals. So thank you for pointing that out. All right. Anything else, Commissioners? All right. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Thank you, Mr. both Wheelers who are here today. And we look forward to working with you over the next year. All right. Thanks.
Mayor, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead, City
again,
Manager.
you've seen a lot of economic development items on the agenda. I want to thank again Mr. Klooster for his work, but also to, I think he will be grateful to also acknowledge we have started the recruitment process for Economic Development Director, that and Planning Director. And so hopefully over the next few months, we will go through our due diligence and be bringing in some additional expertise into the department.
Yes, thank you. All right, Commissioners, next we have our last item, and then a reminder, we have executive session right after this, and then we do have Public Safety Committee at 11:30. So I will call this question, I'll call this resolution. It's a resolution adopting the amendments to the Parks and Recreation Strategic Master Plan. Can I get a motion? All right, so this has been presented a number of times. We had a public hearing related to this. We've gotten some good feedback from the community. Our Parks Director is here. Anything to add to this?
Thank you for allowing me to break up your morning of economics with this agenda item.
Wait, parks are an economic
This is
development.
economic development too.
You are correct. Thank you. Just as a reminder, these plan amendments are really about the inclusion of neighborhood master plans as a part of the park planning process. In addition to the river corridor trail plans and river guidelines that were a part of the River for All plans. Most importantly, the inclusion of these plans allows to leverage additional outdoor funding from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Over the last 4.5 years, we've been successful in leveraging an additional $16 million of outside funding. It is because of inclusions of plans like this in the overall park strategic master plan. So we're excited to roll these in, continue down that path of applying for grants to support our work.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions about this? All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next I will ask if I can get a motion to go into executive session, and this is for an executive session related to property matters regarding purchase of property.
So moved.
All right, Commissioner? Commissioner?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
Commissioner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yeah.
Thank you. And yes for me. And so we're going down to room 601? 611. So Commissioners, if you can proceed down to 611, and then those of you who serve on the Public Safety Committee, that's at 11:30 in room 601. And we are adjourned.